My sister mocked me at her own wedding. Her fiancé's entire salary came from my company. My sister grabbed the microphone at her own wedding and told 300 guests I'd always been the family disappointment. She had no idea the man she just married collected his paycheck from a company I owned. If you like stories where silence is the loudest revenge, hit subscribe, because this one's been building for years. My name is Julia. I'm 38, and I grew up in the shadow of my younger sister, Melissa, who was homecoming queen, valedictorian's runner-up, and the kind of daughter our parents introduced first at every family gathering. I was the quiet one who liked numbers more than parties, who spent my college years studying supply chain logistics, while Melissa studied abroad twice on our parents' dime. My Aunt Rosalind, my father's sister, was the only person in the family who ever seemed to see me clearly. She was a retired logistics executive herself, sharp-eyed and blunt, and she used to tell me at every holiday dinner, while Melissa held court in the living room, "The quiet ones build empires, while everyone else is still performing for an audience." I started a freight and logistics company at 26 with a $30,000 loan from Rosalind, who believed in me before anyone else did. It grew, slowly, painfully, through years of 18-hour days nobody in my family ever asked about. By the time I turned 35, Meridian Logistics had grown into a company processing contracts worth over $40 million a year, with regional offices in 4 states. I kept it quiet at family gatherings, mostly because every time I tried to talk about work, Melissa would redirect the conversation back to her own life, and our parents would let her. Melissa met her fiancé Brandon at a mutual friend's dinner party. Brandon was tall, well-dressed, quick with a joke, the kind of man who filled a room the second he walked into it. He worked in operations management, he said, for a logistics firm downtown, though he was always vague about specifics. Rosalind met him once at Melissa's engagement party and pulled me aside afterward. "That man talks about money like he's never actually earned any of it himself," she said. I laughed it off. I told her Melissa deserved to be happy, and if Brandon made her happy, that was enough. What none of them knew, including Brandon himself, was that 8 months earlier, Meridian Logistics had acquired a smaller regional operations firm as part of an expansion into the Midwest, a firm where Brandon worked as a mid-level operations manager. Under the acquisition terms, his division continued operating under its original branding for 18 months during the transition, with an entirely separate management structure reporting up through regional VPs before anything reached my desk. Brandon had no idea whose signature was actually on his paycheck, 3 layers removed from his daily awareness. I hadn't connected the dots myself until I saw his name on an internal roster months later, and by then, it felt easier to say nothing than to explain a decade of family dynamics to my own HR department. The wedding planning began, and with it, the small cruelties I'd grown so used to absorbing that I barely registered them anymore. Melissa asked me to help pay for the florist, since you clearly have money sitting around doing nothing, but never once asked what I actually did for a living. She commented on my dress at the engagement dinner, said it looked very sensible, in the tone she always used for things she found boring. My mother mentioned more than once how proud she was that Melissa had found someone so successful, while I sat quietly, having quietly funded 2 of my parents' medical bills the previous year, without either sister or parent ever knowing. The rehearsal dinner was where the first real incident happened. Melissa stood up to give a toast, and somewhere in the middle of it, looking directly at me, she said with a laugh that made the whole table chuckle along with her, And Julia, don't worry. I know weddings aren't really your thing since you've never had one of your own, but thanks for showing up anyway. The table laughed. I smiled, because that's what you do. And I told myself it was just wedding stress, just nerves, nothing worth ruining her night over. The apology came the next morning, over coffee, brief and clipped. "I didn't mean it like that," she said, already checking her phone. "You're too sensitive." That was the whole apology. It lasted about 90 seconds before she moved on to seating chart complaints. Rosalind sat with me on my porch the week before the wedding, watching me quietly absorb calls from my mother about keeping the peace and not making things about myself during Melissa's big weekend. "You built something real, Julia," Rosalind said. "You don't owe anyone an apology for being the one who actually did the work." I nodded, but some old, tired part of me still felt like the disappointing daughter sitting at the edge of every family photo. The ticking clock arrived 2 weeks before the wedding, when my VP of Operations forwarded me a routine acquisition integration report, finalizing the merger of Brandon's division fully into Meridian's core structure. Starting the Monday after the wedding, all regional managers, Brandon included, would transition to reporting directly through corporate, which meant, for the first time, his employment file would land formally on my desk for final review and compensation approval. I sat with that information for 3 days, unsure what to do with it, before deciding to simply let the wedding happen first. I told myself I wasn't hiding anything. I was just choosing not to complicate a day that wasn't about me. The turning point came the night before the wedding, at the final vendor walkthrough. Brandon, a little too relaxed after a few drinks with the groomsmen, started talking business with one of Melissa's cousins, boasting about a recent bonus structure change at his company that he didn't fully understand yet, mentioning a name, Meridian Logistics, assuming it meant nothing to anyone in the room. I stood near the bar, quiet, watching him describe with total confidence decisions my own executive team had made weeks earlier, decisions he clearly had no idea traced back to me. The wedding day itself was beautiful, by every outward measure. 300 guests, string lights strung across a vineyard courtyard, Melissa glowing in a dress that cost more than most people's monthly rent. I sat quietly through the ceremony, genuinely happy for her in the way you can be happy for someone even when they've spent years making you feel small. Then came the reception toasts. Melissa took the microphone, flushed with champagne, and somewhere in the middle of thanking everyone for coming, she looked out at the crowd and said, loud enough for every table to hear clearly, "I just want to say, growing up, I always felt like the golden child, and my sister Julia was, well, she was always kind of the family disappointment, bless her heart. But hey, she showed up today, so that counts for something, right?" The room laughed, nervous and uncertain, a few guests glancing my way with pity in their eyes. My mother didn't correct her. My father looked down at his plate. I sat there in my seat, in front of 300 people, hearing the words land exactly the way they were meant to: casual, careless, and cutting. I didn't say anything that night. I finished my glass of wine, congratulated the happy couple with genuine warmth I somehow still meant, and drove home in silence, Rosalind's words from the porch replaying quietly in my head the entire way. The following Monday, the acquisition integration completed as scheduled. Brandon's employment file crossed my desk for final compensation review, exactly as the report had outlined 2 weeks earlier. I didn't fire him. I didn't sabotage him. I did something quieter, something that felt, in the end, far more honest than revenge. I simply approved his file exactly as HR had assessed it on merit. No favors, no punishment, and scheduled a standard new manager orientation call, the kind every transitioning employee received, hosted by the regional executive team. Brandon walked into that video call 2 days later, expecting to meet some anonymous corporate executive he'd never interact with personally. Instead, he found me on the screen, introduced by my VP simply as Julia, our CEO, in front of 4 other regional managers he now reported to. I watched his face shift in real time. Recognition, confusion, then a slow dawning horror as he realized exactly whose company had been paying his salary the entire time he'd sat at family dinners, at the very same table where Melissa mocked me for being unsuccessful. I ran the meeting professionally, exactly the way I would have run it for anyone else. I didn't gloat. I didn't need to. Brandon told Melissa that night. She called me in a panic, asking why I didn't say anything, as if the burden of that silence had ever been mine to carry. I told her, calmly, "You never asked what I did for a living, Melissa. Not once, in 10 years. She had no response to that. The fallout wasn't dramatic in the way you might expect. There was no public scandal, no dramatic firing. Brandon kept his job because he was, by every honest measure, competent at it. I never let personal history interfere with fair business decisions. But something shifted permanently in my family after that. My mother started asking about Meridian at every phone call, suddenly deeply curious about how the company was doing. Melissa apologized, eventually, in a stiff, awkward phone call 4 months later, though I noticed the apology only came after she realized exactly how much power I'd quietly built while she wasn't watching. I don't need grand gestures of revenge anymore. I built an empire in silence while everyone underestimated me, and that, it turns out, is its own kind of justice. The kind that doesn't need a microphone at somebody else's wedding to be heard. If this story felt satisfying to you, hit subscribe, because next week I'm telling you about the woman whose husband tried to have her declared unfit to run her own family trust, without knowing she'd already changed the paperwork 6 months earlier.